Good evening. This is the Plymouth Charter Commission meeting live and also on Zoom here in the Great Hall in the Town Hall. This meeting is hybrid. It's also in the Zoom webinar and in person can be viewed live on the local government channel 15 and 47. This meeting is being recorded. Zoom attendees must register using the Zoom webinar link on the Charter Commission page on the town website. Zoom attendees, for public comment, please use the raise hand icon in the lower portion of your screen. And the in-person audience, for public comment, please use the podium and place your name on the sign-in sheet. And now let's pledge allegiance. So tonight we have a number of items we're going to continue to discuss. We'll do a little sort of rounding up of a couple of the items we've already discussed, then we'll get on to the new stuff. We have a pretty full agenda. Public comment is scheduled for 8:30 after we've been at this for a while. And then we will talk about some of the stuff for the upcoming meetings. Invitations to other Plymouth boards and officials from other towns, and the future schedule for the Charter Commission. So the first item for discussion tonight is an item we discussed at the last meeting and also the meeting before that. And I'm just trying to see if we're beginning to approach a consensus, and that is the size of town meeting. We talked about the number of town meeting members. We've talked about how they can be set at a number and controlled mathematically, depending on the number of precincts. So if you have a fixed number, that number would never change. You would just change the number of town meeting members per precinct. And now with redistricting, since we're adding 3 precincts, that's an additional 27 town meeting members. So it would go from 135 with 15 precincts, and then 9 for each of the 3 additional precincts, 16, 17, and 18. And we would end up with 162 town meeting members, still relatively small when compared to our other large towns that range anywhere from 225 to 245. But something we definitely should discuss, and we've hit upon it in the past meetings. So I'd like to open that up to discuss the size of town meeting and as it could be affected by redistricting if we just add town meeting members for each precinct. So I'd like to hear from everybody just to see if we have any kind of a consensus, at least on that point going forward. Larry.
I'm not sure that I'm in the middle of a consensus here, but I think that the one of the issues that was brought forth was that if we have a large number of town meeting members, then a lot of them won't be able to speak on any given issue, which I think is true. And I don't think means that we shouldn't have a large number of town meeting members. I think one of the things that we have to determine is what is the role of a town meeting member. My feeling is the role of a town meeting member is to study the issues and to vote on the issues. We know that the town meeting, as previous charter commissions designed it, does a lot of its work in caucus as far as people speaking. And I know that there are many people who speak at their precinct caucuses who don't end up speaking on the floor of town meeting. This is a long way of saying the idea of having 9 town meeting representatives per precinct, even if we got to, I believe it's 162, with the 18 precincts that the board suggested they're likely to accept, that still puts us on the low end of numbers for town meeting per population. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes,
Well, it's up to them, I guess.
thank you.
So, okay, so,
Go ahead.
hi, yes, I just wanted to, I wanted to echo Larry's concerns because I have not come to a circumstance where I feel it necessary that we start reducing the size of town meeting. I've listened, I'm going to continue listening to the rationale, but the rationale I've heard so far is to manage town meeting in terms of who will speak and who won't speak. That's the rationale of reducing town meeting, when town meeting has existed for hundreds of years before that climate existed.
Bill, could you maybe take down your mask?
Why am I taking my mask down? I'd like to keep it up. Why can't I?
So
They can't, no, you cannot hear me right now?
why don't we just agree we can remove it to this much?
I'm talking right into the mic. You cannot hear me right now? Can I be heard? Oh, okay. Okay, I can, okay. So, back to this idea of reducing the size of town meeting. It's not that I'm not open to this discussion. I'm listening to the rationale. The rationale I've heard so far is that the size of town meeting can be problematic because not everybody can speak, and managing the population of speakers. This is a newly developing issue because I've been around town meeting now for over 22 years, and this is not the problem that we were experiencing at different times. I think that there are more things that we could be doing at town meeting to make it more efficient in terms of how people speak and when they speak, and how we handled the moving of the question to allow people to speak. I mean, people are elected to represent the people, to come in and speak. I think it's really odd that we're always trying to rush through town meeting in one day. And that's not what it was like years ago. It was 2-3 days. Everybody got a chance to speak. And so I remember a town meeting when we used to have 4 microphones and proctors with handheld microphones, and the managing of speakers were done much more efficiently on town meeting floor. So I know that there is this concern of reducing town meeting. I'm trying to find out why town meeting is problematic in the sense it needs to be reduced. There's things that we should be doing to see town meeting more functional, but that one, I'm still trying to weigh the pros and cons of reducing it, because one of the greatest strengths of town meeting is that if a resident wants to become a town meeting member, it's not a daunting task. There's not a lot of fundraising, there's not a lot of joining political efforts. You just, as a resident, decide you want to serve in this capacity, and it's a pretty manageable experience. That manageable political experience to end up at town meeting does lead to something that I've noted over my lifetime observing town meeting, and that is people don't have a lot of political ambition. When asked a very difficult question at town meeting, I have seen people think about the town over their own ambitions or their own agendas. That's not to say people at town meeting don't have agendas and they don't have their priorities, but I have noted that over the years, that when town meeting is faced with a very difficult decision, there's enough people in that room to default back to what is the best thing to do for Plymouth. On other boards and committees, I've noted an ambition level that takes a great deal of time and effort and money to get to where they were, so they think about how they're voting. Town meeting does have this purity of debate, purity of coming to a conclusion that is appealing. And before we start reducing town meeting, I need to find a stronger rationale. I know we're moving from 15 precincts to now 16, 17, and 18, and I do want to focus on how we control the number, maybe. I think that might be a better idea than reducing it, because as Larry has noted, our town meeting is not what you would call at 132 a cumbersome large entity when other elected town meetings town meeting forms of government are even higher than ours. Thank you.
Thank you. That was David.
Well, I'm not going to be quite as verbose. I'm going to be short and sweet. I think a leaner, meaner town meeting is in order, and I favor 5 to 6 per precinct.
Okay. David Peck?
I would just note that, in a way, this conversation on this particular topic is premature because this presumes we're tweaking town meeting, and I don't think this group has yet determined that this is to fine-tune town meeting rather than continue to examine other alternative forms of government. So it's still useful conversation should this group decide on town meeting, but actually about half of the agenda, again, are potential tweaks to town meeting rather than ideas that can be incorporated into any form of government. So I just would point that out. And then, in general, I'm in favor of leaner and meaner, so I support my colleague Dave Malaguti in that sort of broad objective for town meeting. But I just, we have not, I personally continue to be a supporter of some form of council, which is much leaner, meets more often, and, moving ahead on the presumption that this is town meeting tweaking rather than still having an open mind. I request that we maintain an open mind until this full commission makes a decision.
Betsy?
Yes, I had written down the pros and cons of increasing the number of town meeting members from my perspective. And I also want to attend, I know Dartmouth, which has half as many people as Plymouth, has 290 town meeting members, which is more than twice as many town meeting members, elected representative town meeting members. So I'd like to attend some of these larger town meetings, representative town meetings, and see how they operate, because 290 people is a lot of people, and there's another town meeting that's over 300, elected. So I think it'd be interesting for us to visit those and see how they work, if we do go with the town meeting. So the pros that I have on is that the larger your town meeting, the larger percentage it is of town residents. So 100 out of 60,000 or 200 out of 60,000, you double your number, your percentage of people who are represented. The second thing for the pros of having a larger town meeting is you get an opportunity for more expertise, more architects, more lawyers, more school teachers, more housewives, more, all of those can come, CPAs, all different walks of life can be represented in town meetings. The more town meeting members you have, the more opportunity you have for a wide variety of experience and levels of knowledge. And then I'm thinking that if we do stay with town meeting, we will be looking more at standing committees in the future. And I think that also gives us more people to draw from for standing committees. I think that's something that our charter has allowed for in the past and that we haven't seen a lot of. And the only con that I have heard is there's less speakers percentage-wise of representative town meeting members. Now, that doesn't have to be. We could actually eliminate the vote for close the debate. Just not have it, Everybody gets to speak until it's all done. And there are town meetings, I believe Arlington is one, where they do not close debate quickly. They do not. They are going to debate every single article, and everybody who wants to have a say is respected for that. So, and I'm not recommending we do that. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be that if we had more town meeting members, less people get to speak. That's something the way it is now, but that could be changed. So, and I'm not sure that less speakers is desirable either. We do have different mechanisms where you can put your name in to speak on an article and so forth. So I think there are pros and cons, and I think it's good to continue to look at those.
Good. Russell?
Yeah, in talking to the public, one of the things that, and I think we've all heard this, they're really looking for a legislative branch that's not so unwieldy, meets more often, And, you know, it's, have some accountability. And one of the things that I've seen in town meeting, and it's, you know, evident in, you know, this commission, the same people seem to be involved. You know, the same people, you know, get involved in town meeting, get involved in town politics, get involved in, you know, I see a lot of the same public coming to the meetings. So when we say that having 9 town meeting members lets the greater populace get involved, I just think that what we've been hearing is they want something that's a little more able to, you know, if we had less town meeting members, it would be less expensive and easier to meet more often. You know, I know I brought this up a bunch of times, but there's some precincts that still have problems getting enough town meeting members. And I know, you know, most of the people here don't see that in their own precincts, but in precinct chairs, you know, I've talked to other precinct chairs, and they're like, you know, I have a hard time getting, you know, quorums, and I have a hard time, if somebody steps down, getting somebody. So it's just, that in itself is telling me that it's too big. You know, that at its current state, it's too big, and I think we really should look at the numbers. I think that a leaner, meaner, you know, town meeting would really serve the public better.
Yes, Betsy. Frederick?
Could I add one thing? One of the things I want to do, Peter Neville, town meeting member Peter Neville suggested a book called Bowling Alone. And I did read about that book. I didn't buy it, I bought a different one. And now, right now, I've been very busy, and it arrived in the mail, but I haven't read it yet. But it was a similar idea written by an MIT professor. And one of the things I want to be careful of is not to think of the charter as applicable just to the culture we have right now. Culture changes and changes and changes, and right now there may be less of an interest in government and self-governing, but that could change. In 5 years, it could be totally different. So the fact that we're looking at today is important. We need to be real about what today is, but we also can't assume that it'll always be just like it is now. People could become much more interested in self-government, especially as we discussed in the past. If something comes along, like the Bump Rock Road incident, that gets people, or the Brook Road Bridge, that gets people much more interested. So I think we need to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll come down on the side of saying that this is not a major issue. I think that one of the things that's a strength of this charter and the ability of communities in Massachusetts to adjust or address their charters on a regular basis is that if this became a clearly ungainly situation in a year or 2 or 3, we can review the charter, and that happens all the time in this town. I don't know how many charter commissions there's been in the last 20 years, but there have been many charter reviews that have been called by the moderator, and they've tinkered here and there, and this is the kind of thing they could address. I will say also that I don't think this is premature at all. This is the form of government we have right now, and if we're going to criticize it or applaud it, tinker with it, or change it over, we have to address its faults and strengths right now. And if there is a major issue with any of these things we're discussing, whether or not it's about town meeting, it's an opportunity for the critics of town meeting to make their case. If we were to jump to the end and say, you know, this is a long deliberative process, is what I'm saying. I will also say, in terms of what wrestling suggested about people don't want it's the same people. The fewer people you have, I think the more intransigent they are. And different forms of government don't have a lot of these opportunities we're talking about. So if we had, let's say, 50 town meeting members, you don't think those people would be well-known and hard to budge? I think they would be. I think right now, there's usually an opportunity every election season to put in a new town meeting member or two. And that's a good thing. I like to see it changing over. That's why I'm generally in favor of perhaps term limits. That might not agree with some of my other people, but I just think that we need to stress to the community that we're transparent and flexible, and that we are not the same, although of course it usually is the same squad that's doing a lot of the work. We definitely want to make it more available to other people, and that's one of the ways we could do it. So I see town meeting, as Betsy was saying as well, as an opportunity for the community to participate without the political pressures that happen at the upper levels. Thank you.
Just a couple of extra comments, too. To David Peck's point, I do think it's appropriate to be considering specific items, because we're trying to evolve a charter that a majority of this commission can support, perhaps unanimously, perhaps not. But we've got to evolve it slowly and constructively and methodically. We can't put issues aside and say, I'm not going to consider it because I basically don't want the whole concept. I don't want town meeting, I'm not going to consider anything about size or anything else. I think we've got to take each issue as they're served up. We're only spending maybe 10 minutes tonight on this particular point. I don't think it's time wasted. We're trying to think in our own mind, what's the form of government that works best in Plymouth? And the size of the legislative body, whether it's a council or town meeting, is certainly an issue, and I think it's appropriate. Second, just for planning purposes, on December 13th, that night will be devoted to a discussion of the Committee of Precinct Chairs and what kind of role it would play in a new charter. I've been thinking that its powers and duties could be actually quite dramatically changed. And we're inviting the current chair of the Committee of Precinct Chairs and former chairs of the Committee of Precinct Chairs to join in that discussion that night, because it could be that the Committee of Precinct Chairs becomes a vehicle for taking actions that can't wait town meeting action. The criticism that I'm hearing from Mr. Peck is that town meeting only meets twice a year, and therefore we're losing all kinds of opportunities. Well, the Committee of Precinct Chairs may play a role here, and we need to talk about how it can evolve to meet a function. And the third point I just want to make is the one that was Larry talking about, and how town meeting members perform on the floor, and whether adding 27 is going to change the debate. You know, I've been involved with this business now for probably 30 years, and I can remember town meetings that went 6 sessions, 7 sessions. We debated things, I won't say, ad infinitum, but we debated things that needed to be debated. And it didn't matter how many town meeting members there were, there was very thorough debate. And a lot of these towns that we've studied in the last 3 months have town meetings that stretch, not just a single day, but 2 or 3 sessions after that. And I think I've seen the pendulum swing back and forth. Sometimes it gets too tedious, too much time is spent debating, but other times there's not enough debate. And the fact that we seem now always to try to finish in a single day, I'm not sure it serves the purpose of a really good town meeting. And therefore, if we add another 27 members, I can't see it's going to affect the debate one way or the other, but I really think now, if anything, Plymouth doesn't get enough debate in town meeting. And that's why the number of town meeting members is interesting and critical, but I'm in favor of more debate, and maybe this will do it. Wrestling?
Yeah, just a comment towards, when you mentioned debate, I was very impressed with town meeting. There were many debates that did not close. Somebody called for a close of debate.
I mean, the last town
And-
meeting.
In the last town meeting,
I
yeah.
agree with you. Yep.
And it's interesting because in precinct chairs, we've been talking a lot about, as town meeting, we need to take town meeting back. And one of the comments I said is, look, we got to be able to debate. And there's lots of times where my mind has been changed or enlightened during debate. And I think that, that we're working in a good direction. And towards letting people talk and the people, there's been a lot of debate about how the moderator, if you speak on one thing, you have to go to the bottom of the list for the next thing. And it's my comment earlier about the same people. If you watch town meeting, the same people get up and speak at almost every town meeting. And there's certain town meeting members who are not comfortable doing public speaking. And it's just an interesting thing that we should be looking at, that, it's how to get them more involved and how to, I think that, as a town meeting member, you should be, a lot of times I've gotten my constituents saying, thank you for getting up and talking about this, this, and this. And I think that that's part of being a town meeting member, is that you should be able to, talk to what your constituents need you to talk about and stand up and fight for it.
Yeah, one more point on that along that same vein. I think town meeting members are now much more informed and able to speak and know when there are articles that are routine and that don't require debate, and other articles that are going to take a great deal of debate because they're controversial or they raise serious issues. And I think town meeting now is showing that distinction, because we breeze through all kinds of articles very quickly. There's no debate, because it doesn't really deserve debate. And if you look at the last town meeting, there's probably, half a dozen articles that got debated thoroughly, and the others we knew they didn't require debate. So I think town meeting is very discriminatory in that respect. Discriminating, excuse me. Betsy.
Yeah, I agree with wrestling. I think this last town meeting went very well. At the beginning of the Charter Commission meetings, you asked us for, what crazy ideas do you have? And I brought up the idea of a strong town manager, a city council, and town meeting, have all three. I think that the committee of precinct chairs are not elected by the residents, they're elected by the precinct. So I would prefer to see a city council, like David is recommending, that is elected by the whole town, on the election, a strong town manager, but also continue with town meeting. And town meeting would have very specific roles. They would meet and decide on the budget, and we could bring, other roles to the Charter Commission, so that it's not just 9 people deciding the budget for this town. It's not just 9 people or 11 people or whatever it is making all of these decisions. There would be certain, which is what we have now with the state and the school committee. Town meeting can tell the school committee how much money they get, but they can't tell them how to spend it.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking there's some hybrid possibility.
Yeah,
That's all I'm saying.
I've even thought that almost like a House of Representatives and a Senate. I mean, when you have a much larger town meeting and then, an elected sort of Senate, so some kind of collaborative effort like that. So it's
And
an
I think-
interesting idea.
Yeah, I think that the budget would be certainly something that would be, the town meeting would have to agree with the city council on. But there would be a lot of day-to-day things that the town meeting wouldn't look at, and that the day-to-day business would be done between the town manager and the city council, or whatever we called it, town council, whatever we called them. So I still want to continue every once in a while talking about this possibility of not throwing any of the baby out with the bathwater.
Bill?
Excuse me. It was mentioned earlier that there's the same 400 people, 400 or 500 people that are involved in these committees and boards and town meeting. But in some ways, that cross-pollination makes a better town meeting member. If a town meeting member is sitting on a couple of committees, they're starting to really understand the working elements of the town. So I don't think it's a bad thing that somebody is on 1 or 2 committees and a town meeting member. I think, okay, all right. I didn't say you were saying that. I was saying that you were saying that there seems to be about 400 people that are involved in these boards and counties, and they're recycled over as an argument that this process isn't working as efficiently as it should be, because we need to be doing more to get more people involved. I guess was that the tone where you were going?
No, what I was saying is the argument was that if we have 9 members per precinct, more of the populace gets to have a say in in decisions. And my point is that if you look at the people who are involved, and I think that definitely town meeting members should be members of boards and committees, and I think that's, because you're very involved that way, and you get, I'm on the harbor committee, so I get to know a lot about the harbor, which is very interesting to me. But my point was that I think that there's a minority of people like yourself who are on a whole bunch of boards and are paying attention throughout the year. And you're also the type of person who gets up at town meeting and is part of the discussion. My point is I see the same people getting up and the same people getting involved. And something I'd like to see is getting those people who aren't involved as much, those town meeting members who aren't, who aren't involved in other committees and aren't, dare I say, get to town meeting and, are just seeing those articles and just, that was my point.
Yeah.
It's just,
No, I just
I see
wanted-
a lot of
right.
the same people.
Right. But
doing
we're
the
going
same
to, I mean,
thing.
you're going to see a lot of the same people, and that's not entirely a bad thing, because it's good. It's good that the people that are involved are diving into this deeper so that they are better able to process the complicated questions that are thrown at them when the budget comes up and town meeting is proposed. And so it's good that people serve on different committees and boards. And I don't think people should be serving on a bunch of committees. I think that people should regulate the amount of time that they can have to do the job right. I mean, for myself, I only sit on the Zoning Board of Appeals and the CPC. And that's how it's been for a number of years. Obviously, if you want to do something well, you got to throw yourself into it at a certain level. But I think that at a certain point, you can't be on, sometimes I call it the Jan Brady syndrome. I don't know if you remember the Brady Bunch episode where Jan goes from junior high to high school and she wants to stay popular, so she joins every committee and board, club in the school, and it doesn't work out for her. So I think joining every committee is not a good idea. Focus your attention on what you're good at. But I do believe, and Pearl has talked about this, the need to do greater outreach to the residents about what form of government we have, how people can participate in, and the people that are participating in it can think about how to be more effective at that level. I was having a very interesting conversation with Claire Montanari. She was suggesting this idea. We were talking back and forth. Wouldn't it be great if the finance department, once a year or twice a year, gave a 3-hour presentation? It was a thing that town meeting members could participate in, especially new town meeting members, so they could get the terminology correct. What is free cash? What is a revolving fund? That the finance department, once or twice a year, allows an opportunity for people to come in and they give like a finance department 101 presentation to better equip town meeting members to digest this information that they're going to have to look into. So there's definitely things we can do to do outreach and get a better educated person in that position to make a decision.
Yeah, we could be better at mentoring, too.
Move the question.
I think we've wandered a little bit from the number of town meeting members, but I think that it's important for us to recognize that there has been a change in the structure of town meeting. I was a town meeting member in the 1980s. And basically, we got our books and showed up at town meeting. A very small number of people went to the FinCom hearings. And what happened is we changed that. And I'm married to a town meeting member, and I know what kind of work she does before town meetings. She has read the book very carefully. She has gone to a caucus. She has listened to the presentation forum, and she has a note in the column of her town meeting book how she expects to vote on every issue. And I think that that's healthy. That's not to say that there's no chance of dissuading or changing, but it's an unusual circumstance to do that, because we're asking the town meeting members to have the information before they get to town meeting. If you are familiar with the operation of the Senate and the House of Representatives on Beacon Hill, any debate that they have on the floor is irrelevant. It is for show. And I think that what you said earlier, Wrestling, that this was a healthy town meeting, and what Bill seconded, yeah, most of the items don't need serious debate because we know how they're going to turn out. And it's also the case that we'll have a healthy debate, and the vote will be 100 to 23. So it's nice to have had the debate, I suppose. But the purpose of town meeting is to operate a $250 million corporation and to do it effectively. And debate simply for the sake of debate isn't necessary.
One of the things that I did is I went to I've got 2 new town meeting members who have never been in town government at all. So this was their first, and I did ask them, that, and a couple things that they said, they were amazed at how often FinCom agreed with itself. And they also were amazed at the discussion over a $50,000 item as opposed to the discussion over a $9 million item. And how the $9 million item was a half-hour discussion and the $50,000 was 2 hours. And I think that's one of my concerns as how discussion goes at town meeting is my father told me when I became a town meeting member, he said, town meeting can conceive a $50,000 truck. They cannot conceive a $9 million item. It's hard for them to wrap their, so there's, really no discussion over it because they can't really conceive it. But it's one of my concerns with town meeting that often, and that's, exactly what my 2 new town meeting members were mentioning.
Thank you. Let's move to the next item on the agenda. And this is actually a specific instance at the last town meeting that many of us experienced. I thought it'd be good to have some discussion tonight because it leads to some changes that we may want to make as we go forward. And you recall at the town meeting in October, there was a collective bargaining contract, I think it was referred to as the COBRA contract, that was presented basically 48 hours before town meeting. 2 days, I think we had to see it, and that was it. And there was a lot of talk as it was being presented, but nobody really was focusing on the charter requirement, which was that we were supposed to have this information in hand 14 days prior to town meeting. So there was a lot, after the fact, concern that we had really dropped the ball, and I think it's legitimate concern. Because section 2-12-2 of the charter was very clear that this information was supposed to come to town meeting members 14 days in advance, and it didn't. So there's been some debate in the last few days, and I sent you the email chain for you to read. It started with a question from the chair of the Committee of Precinct Chairs to the moderator, whether that vote was properly taken to approve the bargaining contract with such short notice. The moderator didn't answer. Moderator sent the question to the chairman of the Finance Committee. And then I enclosed his rationale, which you really have to read. But basically, as I understand, his argument was that the Finance Committee presented the report 2 weeks in advance, as required, including this article, and only the bargaining contract was enclosed in a supplement, which came in only 2 days before town meeting. But because the original report was on time, this little supplement that sort of added to it should also be considered timely, and there was no problem. Well, and that went to the moderator, and citizens were still asking questions. And the moderator consulted town council. So this is going to, where I think I'm going to end up with 2 or 3 different changes I think we need to make in our charter. But town council rendered an opinion, which is the last thing I think in that email chain, Mr. Rich at Copeland and Page, basically saying, again, no problem. You didn't see any violation of the charter. I mean, the charter says that if you don't get this information more than 14 days in advance, the town meeting has to authorize it going forward with a 2/3 vote. And the obvious correction should have been at town meeting, somebody making a point of order that this article cannot be voted on unless we, by 2/3, agree to take it up. That was not done. So that's where it ended. And I just thought if any of you would like to comment on this process. Yes, David.
Well, having sat through many, many, many years of negotiations, I don't think it's unusual to have a settlement of a contract at the last minute. It happens. And I think following the email chain, I think it probably was legal, if you want to stretch the word legal. I also know that a good attorney can argue both sides of an issue, because if he's hired by this gentleman, he'll argue his way, and if he's hired by this gentleman, he can argue his way. I think the key to this is the lack of information to town meeting for them to say, hey, wait a minute, guys. This issue is before us. We haven't had time to digest it. The only way we can take it up is with a 2/3 vote. Did you say that?
No, I didn't say that.
That's the key. That's the key. I think if a 2/3 vote was called for and it failed, then the issue would have died.
Right. The charter had that relief valve that said basically a 2/3 vote would allow it to go forward.
But nobody brought that up.
Nobody brought it up.
And not a lot of people are aware of it. So I think that's a lack of information. I don't know, I'll defer to your legal opinion as to, well, not your legal opinion, your personal opinion, as to what we could change in the charter to make this right. But I think through the many years of negotiations, this is not the first time a contract was settled in the final hour.
Well, I just think it raises 2 points that I think we should address at some point. The first one is, and Brookline, for example, has this, they have an actual standing committee. It's kind of like a constitutional court. It exists, it consists of, I don't know, 5 or 6 people, and they all know the charter in, forwards and backwards, and they're there as a standing permanent committee to be observing as to whether or not the charter is being followed, pointing out where it isn't, stop the proceeding, whatever. It's the closest thing to an enforcement mechanism. I think they call it well, I'm not sure what they call it, Frank. Maybe it was in their charter, but it's
I've seen more than one
Right.
town meeting or form of government that has a charter enforcement committee in some ways.
But if we
as
had
you
something
say.
like that, they would have caught this. The other change is the role of town council. It seems to me that you can always, and maybe I'm being a cynic, but you can always predict the town council is going to come down on the side of the town manager and the side of the people who hired him on any opinion they're asked for. So I think when we come to the charter and town council and how they're hired, whether their whole function, we've got to address the point that their opinions, I find not always terribly persuasive, depending on who hired them. Yes,
Yeah, this was brought up at precinct chairs, that's why the chair of the chairs of the chairs of the chairs sent that email. And a couple points that the precinct chairs really wanted to make was, the moderator had said that, yes, 2-12-2, calls for somebody on the floor to make that request, that the two-thirds vote. Just so everybody knows, it was 120 to 20 when it came down to the actual vote. So I don't know if the two-thirds would have got it. Anyways, one of the things that the precinct chairs really wanted us to look at, they don't think it should come down to that. They think that there should be something in the charter that says, if you don't have it 14 days before, you can't get it, period. And they really, a bunch of precinct chairs said, it shouldn't come to us. Because I think that, yes, it happens, 0 hour. I don't think there's a town meeting that I've been through that we haven't gotten one of those at the 0 hour. And to me, it comes back to town meeting taking back town meeting. Because everybody's afraid, if we say no to this, they've got to go back to negotiations. Well, tough. And that's, that's what I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask, if we don't approve this, what happens? Oh, you have to go back to negotiations. Well, that's town meeting saying, look, you can't bring this to us without vetting it. And vetting it through town meeting. Betty said that she had vetted it. Well, town meeting just got this. How can I, that's the other thing that my two new town meeting members were texting me going, how do I vote on this? I don't even know anything about it. So I think it's something that we should really look at the charter. Precinct chairs is really asked us to look at really shoring up that language, so it's not up to the town meeting members to ask for that two-thirds vote, but it's something that says, look, if you haven't got it by X.
Bill?
So I guess David Malagutis touched on it, you're touching on it now, and that is, what is the canary in the coal mine that's going to trigger this discussion about this knowledge in our charter? We are all pretty familiar with, we need to get this stuff 14 days in advance. But I think that we're, I know I fell short, and other, was the other half of that equation. We know we have this in our charter. If it's often spoken about. We talked about it a number of times over the last 10 years, getting material in advance of town meetings so we can have an informed debate. And we came up with this 14 days, and it was in the charter, and we knew that. But the other half of this equation was knowing that, well, if you don't get it there by 14 days, then there is, what is the you need to have a two-thirds vote to bring up that article. And that someone has to say that at town meeting. Either the moderator knows it or we know it. Somebody has to bring up this, this information. So what triggers that event? Maybe it's looking at that part of the charter and writing it something that's clear and concise, because when you read that part of the charter, it goes on and on and on, and down there it says two-thirds vote. That should be simply up there on top, because if you watch the email, there were some emails that were going around talking about what does this mean, and the finance committee had a different interpretation of, they were satisfied by taking up the issue just before town meeting, and town council agreed with them. So that was a little bit concerning to me, and where council was on the matter and where the FinCom was on the matter, because it was clear in the charter, it says 14 days in advance or a two-thirds vote. So how do we make that a reality when we get to town meeting?
I think Betsy's, was up next.
I 100% agree with wrestling in terms of no two-thirds vote. I believe that, and this may sound cynical, but I believe that if town meeting had been scheduled for October 1, these negotiations would have been completed before October 1. That's how it worked over and over again. Or if it had been November 15th, then negotiations would have come in 2 days before November 15th. At least that's what my experience has been in the 22 years that I've been a town meeting member. So I think a very firm deadline is a very firm deadline. And if the people doing the negotiating on both sides know it's October 1 or not at all, or whatever the date is, then they'll work hard to meet that deadline. I think the deadline itself is the triggering event. And so if there's a deadline that's inviolable,
Right.
they'll meet it. And then we will get the information. And I want to say something about what wrestling said, it was 120 to about 20. I think that oftentimes town meeting members, myself included, feel a certain amount of empathy for the negotiating unit, whoever's bargaining, So if it's the firemen, I think there's a certain amount of gratitude towards our firemen and sympathy towards our firemen. So we don't really get to examine that. We still don't want to keep them in limbo negotiation-wise. And so maybe that shouldn't be a factor, but it wouldn't be a factor if they had met the deadline. So I think we need to find a way to make sure that the deadline is the
So
deadline.
I think Larry and then David.
Some of you with good memories might acknowledge that I was town clerk for more than a quarter of a century. And I have to tell you that we have to be careful because the number of changes in the 14 days before town meeting is not just union contracts. It is everything. I spent many hours, and I had a lot more hair, trying to get the motions of town meeting so that I could be prepared on stage to take minutes of town meeting. And it got to be Wednesday, it got to be Thursday, and the secretary to the FinCom would say to me, I'm not going to give you them because they're going to change. And so we're going to have to acknowledge the two-thirds vote can work, but we're going to have to acknowledge that this is not an unusual circumstance. If you look at budgets, if you look at a lot of bills, articles, they change right up until town meeting. Also, I do support the idea of town meeting representatives getting their material, but at the same time, I keep hearing from that end that we need a leaner, meaner, quicker, more responsive legislative body. So we need to create a circumstance where the material gets to town meeting representatives, but there is a mechanism for town meeting representatives to say, we don't want to have a special or have to wait 6 months until the next town meeting. So this will not be a simple matter to construct this, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
David?
I'd just quickly point out, in a council form of government, this would be 2 weeks later, or then 4 weeks later, that it would not be driven by 2 days before a twice-a-year town meeting. That's, to me, one of the attractiveness of a legislative body that meets frequently, that you postpone a decision until there's full vetting by the legislative body, and it can be 2 weeks from the next meeting or 2 meetings out, not 6 months out.
Just to, it's not unusual, it's been mentioned a number of times, it's not unusual that we take up an article and we have limited information. And that becomes another debate, that becomes another issue, because it says we need the information 14 days in advance, or we go to a two-thirds vote. If someone was to, I've gone before FinCom with a presentation, and they're unhappy with the level of material that they've received, and they want more, and I have to get them more. Sometimes people take that further and go to town meeting, and there's supplementary information that's passed out the day of town meeting. So when do you, when does that two-thirds, when is the, if you watched council weigh in on this discussion, they were like rendering an opinion that, no, there wasn't a need for a two-thirds vote, that they did satisfy what was required. So there's this idea of how much information are required to supply when you present an article, and then what is allowed in terms of supplementary that's given at a later date, because as the article moves through selectmen and FinCom and into caucuses, questions might come up that require the sponsor of the article to provide additional information at town meeting on town meeting floor. So there's this, you know, I don't know if anybody was watching that response that council had.
Yeah. Mr., yeah, I totally agree that there's going to be supplemental stuff that comes in. Things change. FinCom has a meeting before town meeting. So there is stuff that going to be, but they're minor tweaks of something that we've seen. So it's like, okay, we're going to change it from 500, feet to 200 feet or something like that. I think that major changes are something that we haven't seen anything about, really needs to be in the charter saying you can't do that.
So this was clear, it was a
Right,
two-thirds.
exactly.
Two-thirds vote needed.
Right, and towards teaching our town meeting members and letting them know about stuff like this, last year when this happened, I went to the moderator and I said, Mr. Moderator, what's my recourse here for saying we should not hear this motion? And the moderator told me the only thing you can do is get up and say, we should vote no on this. So he knew about the two-thirds, but he didn't tell me about it. So I think that. But now we know.
Rest of
Now
the
we
thing-
know, exactly. But I just,
No, but I don't think that, I don't agree with the answer. I mean, basically, the moderator is supposed to be the referee and be sure the rules are being followed.
exactly.
If the rule isn't being followed, it's the moderator that should call a timeout and throw a penalty flag and say that this requires it, just like he does with every motion. He says, this takes a two-thirds vote, this
Exactly.
takes a
So
majority
not
vote.
only do we have to train our town
And if he
meeting members,
fails
we have
to
to
do
train
that-
our moderator.
If he doesn't do that, then it's up to one of us standing up and saying, Mr. Moderator, I have a point of order. And then make your point of order, and if the moderator rules you out of order, you just say, I appeal the ruling of the chair. And the town meeting will have the ultimate vote.
And I think all of this goes back to town meeting, taking back town meeting and taking their authority.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
And just, could I add a little bit to that? In the town of Dartmouth, as I mentioned earlier, any ruling by the town meeting moderator, any ruling can be challenged by a town meeting member, not just point of order, but any ruling. And I think that would be a helpful way to take back town meeting as well. Thank you.
Frank?
Mr. Chairman, one of the things I think is a factor here is the quantum of vote. I think issues like this, like a major financial agreement, a contractual agreement, the requirement there is, requirement, I think, is two-thirds. Now, if somebody wants to change a vote, another motion that's out there on some of the issues that come before town meeting, I think the town moderator usually says this requires this quantum of vote, this is a simple majority, or this might be two-thirds if it's a zoning issue. And so I don't think it's that complex. I understand that there are many types of issues like this. The main issue here, though, is that this was not enforced properly, and that there should be, we spoke briefly about this, and it's a good discussion of could be in the charter, is a committee that essentially is standing back and not involved in the to and fro on town meeting. They're involved in making sure things are done by the books and effectively in that regard. This should not have slipped through. This is a major issue, and it gets right to the heart of people's distrust of government. When things like this happen, people end up not trusting the process. It looks shoddy, and that has to be enforced. We have to come up with a mechanism that makes it clear that this will be enforced, and that's all.
I think we go on to the next item, which is the Finance Committee.
Could I ask you to add that in here with our blue and, our green and yellow and red? Add this idea of a standing committee at town meeting whose job is to be parliamentary. How do you
Yeah,
say that?
I think we were referring to it as Charter Enforcement Committee.
Yeah, so whatever it is, could you add that to our list of,
So we,
Michelle could add that in so we don't lose track of it as we
Cha-
go along.
Charter, we'll call it the Charter Enforcement Committee.
Sure, whatever you want to call it, but I just don't want to lose track of it down the road, so I'd like to have it added to our change for discussion columns. Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda is the Finance Committee, its role makeup and how it's formed. And this is a bit tricky because let's just take one aspect of it, and that is, should town meeting members be on the Finance Committee? And that's a very, it's a very important question. It sounds very simple on the surface, but it kind of goes to the whole essence of what is the Finance Committee. Some towns have the town meeting members very prominently on the Finance Committee. Brookline is one of them. They have a whole section of what town meeting members are going to be on the Finance Committee and how many per precinct and so forth. Plymouth has always shied away from it. And I think we need to take a good hard look at it this time to see whether we want to make a change, because I can see good arguments for why the Finance Committee should have town meeting members on it when articles come before the town meeting. So I welcome responses.
I guess,
David?
Didn't mean to cut you off, Bill. I think there should be a separation of powers. I think the Finance Committee should review the financial articles, and I think the separation of power, I think town meeting should approve those articles. One change that I think should be made, or I should say two changes. The first one, I think the Advisory and Finance Committee should be renamed the Finance Committee and handle only financial articles. And I would throw out the suggestion that we have the Committee of Precinct Chairs handle the zoning and other items. And that doesn't give more work to the Committee of Precinct Chairs because the Committee of Precinct Chairs hears everything anyway. So let's have the Finance Committee do the finance. Let's have the Committee of Precinct Chairs do the other articles. And that would eliminate some of the duplication of services. And I also think we should look at the appointment of the Finance Committee. I think there should be a different appointment mechanism because, and no disrespect to our town moderator, he's been a close friend for many years, but for, 30 years now, he has appointed all of the members of the Finance Committee from day one up to the present. And I think that's too much responsibility on one person.
Right. Bill?
I think I've made this was my wish list on the first night, that if this form of government, we're looking at town meeting, we're looking at other forms of government as we talk about town meeting, I think if town meeting form of government is going to justify its existence, it has to play a larger role in the budget process. I've been watching the FinCom because I've required to go there twice a year, every town meeting for 20 years, and sit and watch them. And I have learned through osmosis of just being in the room, the enormous amount of work that the FinCom does. They're building budgets 6 months out. They're meeting with department heads. They're getting to know this material. They hear the cases. The cases are put in these advisory books to us. And I wouldn't say that information is, I'd say it was lost in translation as it came from the FinCom to town meeting members in terms of the level of debate. I've felt this for a long time now, that town meeting needs to be involved in the budget process, the presentations and the debate, so we have a higher level of education of a town meeting member when the budget is debated. Town meetings should not be voting on a $260 million budget if they're not complete, there isn't a higher level of interaction and knowledge on that budget. And the only way to do that is have town meeting members on this finance entity. And there isn't any legislative body of that size that has to vote on a $260 million budget that doesn't participate on a higher level. I see all this work they do, I see all this information they have, and then they come to town meeting and they just sit on the corner of the room, they don't participate in the debate. Imagine if those people were on the floor at town meeting, it would elevate the debate around the budget.
So, I mean, so there are basically three issues here with the Finance Committee. One is the composition, which Bill just spoke to, whether or not town meeting members should be on the Finance Committee. And two was the method of appointment, which David talked about, who appoints the Finance Committee. And three was the subject matter, what does the Finance Committee actually advise on? Just finance articles or all articles? So really three key but different aspects of the Finance Committee that we should be looking at. Presley?
Yeah, FinCom's got to change. I've had this argument with so many FinCom members. The power that they have as an advisory nominated committee, I'm like, they run the meeting. They run town meeting. Every article is FinCom voted this way, and oh, by the way, occasionally we'll tell you that the selectmen voted on it, but FinCom runs the meeting. And they run every article, whether it's dogs or it's financial. And, I know the person who brought up the dog thing last time, and she was telling me she went to FinCom, they had a problem with it, and she's like, it's got nothing to do with financial. I think that we really need to look at FinCom, and I think it's, we're asking, some people have a problem with giving precinct chairs some power because they weren't elected by the people, they were elected by their precinct. Well, we've given all the power to somebody who's nominated by one person. So I'm totally in favor of revamping FinCom. I think they should look at just financial stuff. I think there should be an electoral process of some sort. But yeah, I totally agree with everything that's been said about FinCom. It's just one of my problems I've always had with FinCom.
So what
And I know they do a lot of work, but
Right. What about Bill's argument about having town meeting members involved in FinCom, which gives an article a total different complexion when it's presented at town meeting floor if a town meeting member was part of the Finance Committee? David?
Well, I lean toward having it open to town meeting members.
Open to
I
town
mean,
meeting members?
because it is an aspect of the legislative side of our government, and, advising town meeting, so their inclusion and maybe getting, the town meeting members that much more informed on the issues, but they are part of the legislative branch. They're not part of the executive branch.
I think it's a missed opportunity when they're not. I mean,
Yeah.
they're all the caucuses of town meeting members. If one of their members was a standing member of the Finance Committee, that would be additional information all those caucuses would have
Yeah.
right early
Yeah,
on.
so as I've thought about it, I have no objection to town meeting members being
Right.
part of FinCom. And I
That's
like
it.
David's idea of separate, because certainly the other charters we've looked at, there's advisory committees and stuff, but you could separate financial from non-financial really easily.
Yeah, Betsy?
Thank you. I was looking at this, first of all, I don't see a conflict with the town meeting member being on the Finance Committee. I certainly think that there's benefits, but I'm not sure what the cons are at this time. Why is that a problem? I mean, I understand philosophically what you said, David, but I'm not sure why that's a problem. So I would be open to town meeting members but not a majority, by the way, not a majority of members. But also, I was looking at this letter that Roz Jones very nicely typed up for us, and she had some very strong recommendations. And one of her recommendations was that, you know, one of her concerns was what we're talking about, is that one person gets to appoint everybody, and that there's a tremendous amount of turnover, so people don't get a chance to really learn the whole financial process before they're gone, you know, cycled out again. And so she talked about ways to keep people involved. And she also talked about the Association of Town Finance Committees and encouraging town meeting, finance committee meetings, advising finance committee members to be involved with this. So I think that we want to come back maybe later on again and consult her letter, because I think she took a lot of time and she had a lot of good ideas. And the importance of finance committee, I don't think, can be overstressed. It's like a super important committee for town meeting to feel comfortable with. And I think that the finance committee, the way it was when I came into being a town meeting member 22 or 23 years ago, and the way it is now, it seems different to me now. It seems, it seems like, I'm trying to say it kindly, but I won't go any further. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Larry?
The one problem with the difference between the advisory and the finance part of the committee is the percentage of articles that are financial. It's huge. I mean, you know, creating a budget is an impossible process. It is. Even if I disagreed with some of the decisions on occasion that the FinCom came up with, the amount of work that it takes to do that is phenomenal. And I think that while I tend to like the idea of admitting town meeting members to whatever we're going to end up calling it, the financial side of FinCom, I think that it's going to be restricted to town meeting representatives who are retired or otherwise have amounts of time available to them that I couldn't imagine when I was employed. So, I mean, I think that is one thing to be considered. And I also think that it might be possible, I heard the argument in previous charter committee discussions, what do we do if there isn't one person appointing FinCom members? We could end up hamstringing the entire system. Well, I think that we could deal with that with an emergency appointment that could then be dealt with a larger process. So, yeah, I think that many of the ideas that we're working on are good ideas, but let's also appreciate what FinCom does to get to the point of making their recommendations. It's not a simple matter. It's a huge commitment of time.
Frank?
I would say I'm leaning toward town meeting members being participatory. I see, again, the Brookline model. I think maybe it's a little large. I think it's 30 members, 18 of which are town meeting members. I would not restrict the COPC to anything but financial. I think they generally represent town meeting, which is concerned with all articles, and I think limiting them to discuss or debate or in some ways restrict them to the other articles would not really work. But I do think that having the Finance Committee focus on the strictly financial articles is a good idea, although I've seen some success. I've seen some articles that they had nothing to really say about or concern themselves with get a successful vote at the Finance Committee and end up that being a springboard towards success overall, but still, given the complexity and the size of the budget, restricting them to those things would be, I think, a positive way to be more effective as a hybrid model of Finance Committee and town meeting members. I would support that.
Bill?
I know this is a little unusual, but we have material that was supplied by Roz Jones on the FinCom, and it's very interesting material because it touches on some of the things we're touching on now. Would it be, with the pleasure of the committee, is there any chance that we could ask her some questions about this memo that was supplied to us? Because she does dive into some of the challenges that the FinCom faces, which we wouldn't be aware of because we don't sit on that level.
This is Roz?
Roz Jones's memo that we're looking at today, and I see that she's here tonight, so I don't know if she's okay with it, and the pleasure of the committee is to ask her a few questions about her memo.
Okay.
It's up to you.
So would you like to, Kip, your last name was? Okay, so you wrote us a letter with your thoughts about as a member of the Finance Committee. It was very helpful, very interesting. Good critique.
Would it be helpful to read it into the record? I was going to do
I
that
think
during
we've
public
all-
comment anyway, because anybody
You read it
watching may
into the
not.
record, or is everybody familiar with it? Yeah, I think we've all read it. So why don't you comment on the letter, and then we'll ask questions, because we've all read the letter.
Okay, and it's in the public record? Okay. Okay. Just Roz Jones, Precinct 2, former member of the Advisory and Finance Committee. I joined the committee in July of 2017 and stepped down in this past April of 21. I was second vice chair of the committee when I stepped down. I think that there's a lot of work that goes into the Advisory and Finance Committee, but there's a lot of opportunity with it, as some of the comments I've heard. Number one is its role in the budget process. The budget, in my experience, is pretty much baked by the time it comes to at least the town operating budget is baked at the time it comes to the Advisory and Finance Committee. If one is to go look on the town website under the budget fiscal year 2022, you'll see a chronology of documents, and you can lay out a timeline as to what happens. And typically, this past budget in September, the town manager, the finance director meets with the FinCom, I guess you'd call them officers, chair, vice chair, second vice chair, and discusses their intent on the budget policy. They've spent time looking at what kind of Chapter 78 is expected, making some assumptions about the budget, and they start to have meetings with the department heads in October. And they have an appeal process with the department heads. They drive to the department heads what the budget allowances are for new initiatives and that sort of thing. And then the town manager has a recommended budget. It's submitted to the select board, and the select board reacts to it. And then it's submitted to the finance committee. And the finance committee then reacts to the select board's reaction to the town manager's budget. So to say that the finance committee is not at the beginning of the process, to me, is an understatement. It is, most of the budget items are already baked. When the FinCom meets with the different town committees, like the school committee and public safety, we're really just asking them to rationalize budget. We ask specific questions, and why are you needing new training guns? And they rationalize it well. They've already vetted it through many gates before it comes to FinCom. So FinCom really is in a position to nickel and dime the $260 million budget. What would be more effective is if FinCom was at the beginning of the process. way before the town manager sends out the budgetary policy. But many of you may know that a select board member, Flaherty, had lobbied for, and the select board voted on a fiscal policy about a 1% budget reduction. That's proactive fiscal policy management. What FinCom is doing is it's sort of at the tail end of the budgetary process. So I think that there's an opportunity. In my letter, I indicated that if you benchmark Plymouth against other towns, there's an association of town finance committees. Hundreds of towns meet and have trainings on best practices for budgetary policy. It's not something that we were engaged in when I joined the committee. I found out about it, and several of us went to a training. And in that training, I learned about what other town finance committees get involved with. Many other towns get involved in a much more proactive basis. So there's opportunity there with Finance Committee to help plan the budget and not just respond to the budget. In addition to that, I mentioned, how is it that the Finance Committee is appointed? And to somebody's point, it is an appointment. It's a very opaque process by which one person in the town has unilateral authority to receive applications, review them, and appoint, with no transparency whatsoever. And I don't think it's wise, personally, to have that opaque process for a number of reasons. And then it's not working. If we have this turnover on Finance Committee, as I said, I don't know what the vetting process is. I don't know how prepared everybody is. I know coming into Finance Committee myself, I had a huge learning curve, a huge learning curve. It took me a couple budget cycles to really get it, and I'm just being honest. I don't think I'm not the brightest bulb in the room, but I'm not the dimmest either. And it took a lot and unfortunately, a lot of people just don't stay with it. We've had people come in, they don't realize the commitment or don't have an appreciation for it, and they drop. And there's a huge turnover. So something in the process is not working. If you do not have continuity of people that surpass the learning curve, then you just can't be as effective as the committee could be. And people are dedicated. There are many people that know their stuff well, but just in this last cycle, we had one person get appointed and drop within 1 month. That's just not good for Plymouth. So, I made some recommendations. I think it's, there's definitely opportunity for improvement. There's a lot of people that are dedicated, but I think, there's opportunities, and I hope this commission, thinks about some of those options.
Bill?
So thank you for the memo. Thank you for taking the time to come down and explain it even further. I have noted you on the FinCom for a number of years and have had to present to you. And I have been able to watch the discussions amongst the committee members. And this idea of being involved in the beginning of the process, that yes, you have these subcommittees, you go to these interactions with these different departments, but they're just kind of, you're there, they're there. There doesn't seem to be any, I guess, any traction, that when the subcommittee appears before the entity planning this segment of the budget, and you guys raise reservations about something, it's not really fully embraced, or there's...
Well, the evidence is in the budget. How often has Finance Committee altered the budget significantly?
Right.
In the last budget cycle that I was on, in order to implement the select board's fiscal policy, the school committee, I think, had to cut some positions, and that's where they were headed.
Right.
And it was the recommendation of the Finance Committee subcommittee to add in those positions back in.
Yeah, so you'd have to build into this system some language that forced the question, and that was the Finance Committee and their subcommittees would be part of this process as it began. As you noted, The town manager has a budget. The town manager meets with department heads, comes up with a budget, sends it to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen react to it, and then it's sent to FinCom, and FinCom reacts to it. So this idea of these subcommittees, currently, they're kind of already looking at things as you have described it, as already baked in. There's very little you can do as a FinCom subcommittee meeting with these different departments. So you'd have to go back to this thing that you just talked about, where it was the town manager meeting with department heads, sending it to BOS, sending it to FinCom. So where along, you'd have to build into this system some requirement that they engage the FinCom in these subcommittees on these parts of the budget.
Sooner in the
How
budget.
do you see that? Would you see would work there?
You know, I think it was someone I met from Carver who told me they actually sit down with the town manager at the very beginning of the process and help to put together the budget, partially out of necessity. They don't have the level of finance director that Plymouth has. When Plymouth, I think, is blessed with someone who is very talented, and there is a staff that allows us to kind of do that without volunteers weighing in. So it's possible that if you had a finance entity, I'm not even going to call it finance committee if it's something completely different, but some dedicated people who are willing to meet with the town manager and review, the various inputs into the budget, not just the tax base, but the aid and other pieces of it to get a better understanding. I mean, at the end of the day, 75% of the budget is wage-related expenses. It is salaries and benefits of town employees and retirees. And there's very little appetite to move the needle on that. There really is. So you end up, to somebody's earlier point, nitpicking a $15,000 piece of equipment and not looking at health insurance that goes up several $million a year, or at 11%. The big picture items seem immovable, and I think that's where some of the frustration lies.
So how would you recommend, from the FinCom's perspective, how would you recommend dealing with that 75% of the budget?
I think that fiscal policy, looking at projections of for instance, wage trends, benefits trends, forecasting. That was one of the things at the Association for Town Finance Committee training, is that you use these tools, and there's actually a manual. I'm sure Lynn Barrett's aware of it, but you forecast on some key measures, and based on that forecast, you look at where you're going to have problems. A lot of it, quite honestly, is health insurance. And what you can do in your negotiations with your labor unions, talk about, this is going up at this level, introducing other options to kind of temper that, and getting involved in that sort of big picture fiscal planning, not looking at a budget after it's already embedded.
I just have one follow-up thing. The Association of,
Town finance committees. You can find information about it on the Mass Municipal Association website, which is mma.org.
right,
There's a very robust site with materials and training materials posted.
okay, and you've participated in that?
I did.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Frank?
I think you mentioned, and in my long experiences covering the town years ago for the newspaper, I've been very impressed with the quality of the staff that we have, the financial staff, Lynn Barrett et al. And they do a lot of this on their own. I still see the need for having that process, as you describe it, where our citizen financial teams are there at the beginning. I'm not sure that would have a material effect so much at this point, given our lucky circumstances financially, staff-wise, but that can change. Lynn and other people can go away, or we can be under far more stress financially. Can you give me a specific example of where you think a town a group like the Finance Committee, if they had the ability to be at the beginning of that, could have had a material effect on where we would have gone, how things would have changed?
Well, what I can tell you is what best practices are in budgeting, whether it be in a municipality or a private corporation, and it's forecasting. And forecasting on key levers, if you will. You know, salary being 75%, salary and wages and the impact, you know, of the growth of the town and what that's going to look like. Health insurance, what is the cost, what's the rate at which it's rising? If you had a team of people that helped to bring to the public, and I think that's part of the issue, is that our finance director is very savvy, but she does it as part of her daily job. Democratizing it and socializing it is not something I think that she puts at the forefront in a way that's digestible by town meeting members and others. So if you had a citizens group that helped to translate this so that town meeting members and other citizens understood fully the impact of these trends, then you would have more of an impact when we go to town meeting and vote on a budget. We understand maybe what the implications of it are over time.
Thank you.
David?
Thank you very much for your insight, and thank you for jogging my memory. I remember back in 1976, then moderator Earl Rose appointed me to the Finance Committee, and the first night when I came home, I said to my wife, "What in hell did I get myself into?" So I can relate very much with what you're saying. And I can't disagree with a lot of what you're saying, but you are a volunteer group, and much appreciated. But to get involved in the budget process earlier, which I don't disagree with, but that's a tremendous commitment for your members, because you have to meet with the finance director, the town manager. You wouldn't be meeting with the Board of Selectmen at that time. You would be forming the budget. And that's a tremendous commitment, would probably be during the day. Do you think that there would be an adequate number of members of a volunteer board that would commit to such a huge undertaking?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I do know that collectively, the number of hours that are put into FinCom today by 15 people, you know, if you took some of that effort and pushed it a little earlier in the process, whether it's a few people that knowingly, when they join, are part of a subgroup that meets to work on that part of the budget and commits to the time commitment that it would take. If people knew up front that that's the ask, if they had an interest, they would be willing to do it.
Okay, one last question. I guess Betsy and Larry, that's it.
I actually have two questions. One, Larry referred to how much, first of all, I want to thank you for your service, and I want to say that I respect the work that all the Finance Committee members do over the many years that I've been a town meeting member. And when I referred to how it used to be, it just seemed to me that there was more controversy between the Finance Committee and the Selectmen, that there was more debate rather than, it seems like now it kind of goes very, very smoothly without much discussion, but that may be because I'm not as in the process. But, so Larry Beiser mentioned that it's a huge number of our articles are financial. Do you think that the Finance Committee would have a better opportunity to look at the finances if they were not being asked to look at circus articles and dog articles and you know, that kind of thing?
I think that's a reasonable conclusion.
So you would agree with that. Secondly, I don't know if you met anybody from the town of Sharon when you were looking at that committee, but the town of Sharon has a priorities committee which does that forecasting that you talk about, and they have a finance committee that looks at the financial articles for this particular town meeting, say fall town meeting. But the priorities committee It says here, informs itself of the town revenues forecast, informs itself on state aid and so forth, informs itself on debt level forecasting and so forth. So it sounds like you might actually be in agreement with what Sharon is doing, have a forecasting priorities committee, or you know, the long-term committee, and then the immediate committee. Would that, do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I do.
It's called Priorities Committee in the town of Sharon, so maybe we could look more at that in the future.
First of all, I had a different oath for FinCom members. When I swore them in, I said, "Are you serious? Do you really want to do this?" I understand what it went through. It seems to me that the meeting of the subcommittees is FinCom subcommittee members plus Finance Department personnel, plus town manager personnel, and that's what, as a division head, I faced in defending my budget. So, in a way, I'm not sure who we want to take out of the equation in the early process, because everyone was there. I mean, the only thing that happened before that was the town manager asked, okay, here's the rule. You can't go up more than, level service, whatever the rule was. And then I came up with numbers. And those were the numbers that were presented at that meeting where everybody was. Do you have a problem with that process? Because everybody seemed to be involved other than the select board.
The town manager set the budgetary policy, and you created a budget within that budgetary policy.
Well, I was under the impression that the select board created that policy.
Okay, well, the town manager in agreement with the select board.
Yep.
But what I'm saying is that the finance committee wasn't necessarily creating the overarching budgetary policy.
Okay.
For instance, it was just recently that one select board member implemented, and the select board voted, it was a very close vote, to adopt a fiscal policy of a 1% reduction to the operating budget. And that is something that FinCom wasn't consulted on. It's being followed, and it's a lost opportunity to have a finance committee that isn't involved in a fiscal policy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jones, being here.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it, sharing your
Thank you very much.
experience on the FinCom. And now we turn to public comment. Anybody wish to be heard? Let's say Mr. Devil. Right.
Guess I'm supposed to sign in. I'm Peter Neville. I'm a town meeting rep from Precinct 10. I want to reiterate what I said at your last meeting on how much I appreciate the time and the talent that's going into this process. I think the town's very well represented here, so thank you. I guess to the point of whether or not we're going to talk about changes, I just ask you all to keep in mind that 7,000 people signed a petition to create a charter commission, and that's you. Those 7,000 people would like you to look real hard at the form of government that we have and any options. And I guess saying that, I'm wondering, how are you going to capture the suggestions or the thoughts that come out in discussion? I'm in favor of a strong town manager, a council, and town meeting reps. Someone's offered that. how is that idea going to be captured so that later on, when you're pulling things together, and this is a procedural question, you're going to remember that that was an idea about the form. You know, I think it's section 1 in your charter of how the government is going to be set up. So I don't know if you've already talked about that. And all of these different ideas, I know the minutes will reflect them, but is someone taking it to the next level and distilling it and saying, that was a good idea, or that idea has to be brought forward and beaten down so that we decide we're going to have 5 town meeting members, not 9, or we're going to have 12. I'm reading the charter pretty closely. I reformatted it into a Word document so that I could read it, because it comes out as a PDF online, and it's inscrutable. So I don't know if you're looking forward to any editorial comments about how the charter is laid out and the potential redundancies that are, very clear if you read it closely, and how they should come forward to you. Is there going to be a night or an agenda item that just says, well, let's look at the text. Let's look at the language so that we avoid repetition and redundancies. I wrote some notes here, and I'll last week, Anatol Zuckerman published a 5-minute speech in the Old Colony newsletter. And he articulated, it took him about 3 paragraphs to get to his suggestions of what he thought the government should look like. And so I wondered, I read that and I said, wow, this looks pretty good. Will that ever come to this floor? Will someone say, well, you know what, that was a pretty good letter? We have to take a look at that. Who is this guy, Anatol Zuckerman? I understand he's older than I am. And I understand he's had, like many of you, many years of public service in town government. So is there an opportunity for someone like him to come forward, or is it just, he put it in the Old Colony Memorial and that's it, That was a November 12th issue. When you were talking about the collective bargaining, Section 2-12 of the Charter, my comment, for what it's worth, is 14 days prior to town meeting, I want to look at a document that if it's going to change, I'm a town meeting rep. Change it on the floor of the town meeting. Don't give me, at town meeting, a purple copy of things that have been changed that I can add now to my pink and my white and my yellow. Like Roz, I'm not the brightest bulb, but I'm no village idiot. And my frustration, I'm going to say I'm sick and tired, but my frustration is that it's a joke that we are dealing with a collective bargaining agreement that is barely, the ink is barely dry at town meeting. And I know how sausage is made. And, David's right, we could go both sides of this all the time. Well, it's a supplement, and you already had the meat and potatoes. No. You want to make those changes? You do them on the floor. That's just a suggestion.
Mr. Neville, you have 1 minute.
I guess the final thing I have to say is, I am in total agreement with changing the appointment of FinCom people. And I think, again, I'm going to say, I think there should be more credentialing for that office, those positions. And that holds true for every elected or appointed position. Are you folks aware that the word appointed is used in the charter as opposed to hire? The town manager appoints. The town manager doesn't hire. The select board appoints. The select board doesn't hire. I wanted, that's just one of those editorial things. I'm done. Bill, did you want to ask me something, or? Uh-oh, here we go.
Peter, I'd like to take you up on your offer.
What's
If you
that?
have redundancies, could you let either me or the whole group know when you're in writing? Really
Be
appreciate it.
happy to.
Provide it to us.
It's going to be a work in progress.
So a couple things, Mr. Neville. First, you asked about the process. We will be drafting, starting putting together the pieces after the first of the year. So you begin to see drafts of charters that you can comment on.
Oh, great.
We'll post them in our website.
Thanks.
It'll begin to come together. And secondly, you mentioned Mr. Zuckerman. He read that statement
he's here?
here at our meeting. We all have it. It's
Oh,
in our
great, great.
file here. I've talked to him about it.
Great.
So he's made an input just like you are, and we thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank
if you have additional information, don't hesitate to give it to
I'm sorry,
Michelle.
Bill?
If you want to give your additional information to Michelle Turner, a staff person,
Yeah.
she can incorporate that into our materials.
Okay.
All right.
I will.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Neville. I agree with what other people have said. I would love to see any suggestions you have about the charter language and text and redundancy as well, but not just the redundancy, any kind of suggestions you have about making the charter more readable and more approachable, or make more sense, or change any words. I would love to see those suggestions. Also, Mr. Chair, I have a letter here from Claire Montanari, who is a chairman of a precinct. She sent me a letter that I as a public comment. Shall I read that now? I also sent it to Michelle. It's a short letter. It's up to you. Oh, everyone got that from Claire? Oh, good. Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay, so for the public, maybe at some point we can get that read. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, do we have somebody on Zoom? We have 2 folks on. Okay, go ahead. I'm bringing Susan Ready.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, yes.
Yes. Hi, good evening. It's a pleasure to speak tonight. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My name is Susan Reddy. I have lived in Plymouth for 6 years, and over the summer I attended 2 Charter Commission meetings, and I have read the current charter, so I have an understanding of the task at hand. I really love the town and applaud the work you guys are doing to revisit the town charter to update it. Can you guys still hear me? I didn't lose
Yes,
anybody, did I?
Susan, could you turn your microphone down a little? You're overwhelming the room.
Oh, Jesus. Hold on a minute.
Okay. Just tone it down a little. There's good.
is that-
That's much better.
is
Thank you,
that better?
Susan.
Okay. So I'm speaking today because I see opportunities and risks for the town, which I've highlighted in some prepared comments. Bottom line, I have 4 requests for the commission to please consider. Number one, and you're probably going to do this, but can you share the criteria or factors that you're using to determine the best form of government for Plymouth? Number 2, can you survey key stakeholders, if you haven't already, to understand what is going well and what needs to be improved in the town? Number 3, can you put options on the ballot for voters to decide on the best form of government? And number 4, develop a vision for town government that is agile and responsive to constituents. I understand that in the fall of 2022, the Charter Commission will file a report documenting findings and research, and I have a couple of questions related to that. Over the summer, you conducted research of forms of government in other towns, and one of the meetings I was in, you talked about it at a great deal. Will you be publishing the analysis of the data that you collected in that exercise? What factors drove the towns that you looked at to change from one form of government to another? And before your report is published, will you be surveying residents and officials to understand what is going well in the town and what are the pervasive problems that need to be addressed? So I did some research of my own. I looked at the form of town government for 20 towns similar in size to Plymouth, 8 that are larger and 12 that are smaller. The towns range from 29,000 to 94,000 residents. 16 or 85% of the towns have a mayor and elected city council. 2 have town council / manager, and 2 have a representative town meeting format. So I thought it was interesting that 85% of our peers have the same form of government. So what factors drove each town to make that decision? So maybe I can help answer that question by providing an example of the process the town of North Attleboro used to decide on the right form of government. Their charter commission solicited feedback from town officials, employees, and residents, and identified the core issues that need to be addressed. The town then decided on the form of government that would best address the issues. To me, that was a best practice. So if you were to ask me what issues I see in the town, I would tell you that the town needs a vision and a strategy for the future that is aligned with the speed of change and innovation happening in the world today. The world is dynamic, interconnected, which accelerates the need for agility and decision-making to thrive and take advantage of opportunities. So I ask you, is our current form of government with roots in the 17th century up to that task? The obvious question here is, what form of government is best suited to effectively govern today and in the future? Our current structure of biannual town meetings is not nimble enough to meet the demands of today. You know, for instance, if people can order an item on Amazon and have it delivered the next day, why would anyone wait 6 months or longer for action from town government? For example, in my research, I saw it took 3 town meetings and 18 months to approve the roof of the school. And in today's world, that timeline is just unacceptable. So, how can we continue to improve the town and attract the innovators, the entrepreneurs, and the businesses that we need if they have to wait months, if not years, for decisions? So in closing, I'll reiterate the 4 actions that I am asking the Commission to consider. To publish the criteria you are using to evaluate and recommend the best form of government for Plymouth. Survey key stakeholders to understand what is going well and what needs to be improved in the town. Put options on the ballot for voters to decide on the best form of government, and develop a vision for a town government that is agile and responsive to constituents. Once again, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm happy to take questions. Don't know if we have the time, but happy to take any questions if you have them.
I just have one question. Thank you for your statement. What was the first out of the 4 items, number 1?
To publish the criteria that you're using to evaluate and recommend the best form of government for Plymouth.
Publish criteria. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, criteria or factors, that you're considering when you make your recommendation.
Right, I got the rest of them. Comments?
One very short question. Could you tell us, Ms. Reedy, what precinct you're from?
I believe it's 15.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have questions? Do you have any questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Susan Reddy. We appreciate it. Thank you for coming in tonight and sharing your thoughts with us. Michelle, is there somebody else, public comment? Al DiNardo?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead,
Thank you.
Al.
My name is Al. Yeah, hi. My name is Al Donato, live at 46 Sunflower Way. I did speak on September 21st. I'm not going to repeat the things I've said. I moved here to Plymouth. I served in Saugus Town Meeting, which is the smallest, and to me, it was very effective for 30 years. We used town meeting very effectively against a corrupt town manager that went on to be indicted, and we had a corrupt board of selectmen. So my question is, as some of us talk about consolidating power, because that's what maybe that could happen here, is, what do we do when the government gets away from us? What do the citizens do? And as President Monroe said, if men were angels, there would be no need for government. So with that, and we think of leadership from, the Mother Teresa's of the world to more of a Stalinistic way of governing, what happens when this government moves to more of a Stalinistic sort of government? Plymouth has a lot to lose. You have a lot of open space. The majority of the town is still available for a development. And I think people would be very naive if they don't believe that there are big developers that are eyeing communities such as Plymouth for potential rezoning. Right now, town meeting, you need 2/3 vote to stop that. I saw that in Saugus as we were surrounded by many other communities. If you read the MMA website, one of the negatives of the city form of government is that you build these political machines. And that's the problem. They build these political action machines. I mean, we could look at the city of Lawrence, what happened there 10 years ago, an indicted mayor almost won re-election twice. He left the country for 4 years and almost beat the mayor after leaving the country for 4 years. That happened about 10 years ago in Lawrence. We may all know about what happened in Chelsea. The last 3 mayors of Chelsea were all indicted. And I believe that stopped around the late 1980s. They have a city manager now. That's when the state had to come in, and Chelsea went into receivership. BU was running the schools. Governor Weld at the time, more or less, forced them no longer to have a mayor. We can look at Fall River, where an indicted mayor survived a recall because of a political machine. We can look at areas of, for instance, my friend, and everything, what I'm going to say is legal, but the city of Lynn has Mayor McGee. His father ran, he was Speaker of the House in the late 1970s and early 80s.
Mr. DiNardo,
Tommy McGee.
Mr. DiNardo, we're running out of time. Could you make 1 more minute, please?
Okay, with that, I'll say is, right now with the form of government, it's much easier for the citizens to grab those levers of government, to stop things, to contain a town manager, to contain a board of selectmen, and that's going on in Wareham. You could see that town meeting has done that. They've stripped some power away from the select board. So we just need to be cautious when we go forward here with this consolidation of power, and that the citizens will no longer be able to access it as efficiently. So I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Appreciate your comments. A couple things as we get near the end of our agenda. First is this color-coded chart. I think, Betsy, you mentioned this. This was passed out at the last meeting. I intend to work with Michelle before the next meeting to bring this up to date, pass it around, so we start putting together an indication of how we feel about some of these issues. We'll be using this chart. Second, I want to bring something before the commission for your input and decision. We've been invited, I got a call from the town manager last Tuesday asking this commission if we would be willing to go to the selectmen, to the select board, and join them in a meeting. I said I would discuss it tonight with this commission, and I would inform the town manager tomorrow of the results of our discussion. So that's on the table, and I'm looking for responses, comments. Larry?
The select board is elected under the charter to fulfill certain responsibilities. Developing a charter is not one of them. We were elected for certain responsibilities, and our responsibilities are dealing with the charter. So, I do believe that we have an invitation to the select board members to join us and provide their wisdom on issues that come before us. And I know that Ms. Cavaco has availed herself and has provided us with wisdom on several of the issues. So my thought is,
Patrick Flaherty as well.
Patrick as well, and previous select board members. My thought is, we maintain that information, that invitation, but I don't see any purpose to our having a joint meeting.
Bill, go ahead.
I think it's important that we have, we will continue to reach out to the residents. We will continue to reach out to elected, appointed officials, invite them to come in and take the time to present their concerns to us. If they want to schedule some time with us, we've accommodated past selectmen who have wanted to present to us, former selectmen. But we want everybody on an equal footing. Every resident should have the same amount of time and opportunity to speak for us. So I think that's important too, that the process that we're going through right now is effective. And I would continue that course of action.
Can I ask, Michelle, I think we've certainly invited members of the select board to meet with us during our meetings, during our commission. I've made that announcement several times, but I think it would be good, Michelle, if you would kindly send a letter invite to each member of the select board and invite them to come here and give us their ideas on how to improve our local government. And I think it's good to put it in writing. I have to say, having been involved with charter commissions for a long time, I've never seen a situation where the charter commission, went to the select board. If you look at the statute on charter commissions, it never mentions the select board until the very end when our report is done and a charter is written, then we present it to the select board, who then gets it published in the newspaper before it goes on the ballot. So I think we need to follow the process in the statute, and we don't want to show any bias one way or the other of the form of government, who we meet with and whoever. But if people have ideas, we welcome them, and please bring them to us. Thank you. Any other comment?
Bill. Bill.
Who's speaking? Yes, Scott, go ahead.
It's sorry, I'm on Zoom in the car. My only question was did that invitation give a reason on why they wanted to have a joint meeting with us? I'm in agreement that we're separate and unique. I was just curious as to what the purpose of that invitation was.
No reason was given, just that they would like to have a meeting. I think the words were, it's time we have a meeting.
Yeah, I think I echo the, I don't really see the need for us to have a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. We've invited them repeatedly to come and share their concerns. If they want to share their concerns, they're more than free to come to us.
Right. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate that. Any other comment? So let's see.
Well, Bill, I'd just say, our goal is to maximize input in all forms, these public hearings, talking to the community. We've heard other towns have tables at town festivals so they can get input. So I don't object, I support, every possible way to be transparent and receive input. So whether we joined them or they joined us as individuals or so on, so I'm supportive of that communication in any way we can do it. We should be open and in no way restrictive of input.
Okay, any other comment? Betsy?
I think that what you said earlier is to, make sure that every select person gets
Betsy,
an
I can't hear
individual, to make sure that every select person gets an individual invitation to come and speak with us through Michelle, I think is a great idea.
You inviting him to come here?
I'm not for a joint meeting. I'm for additional selectmen. We've had 2 come. If more selectmen want to come, I'd love to hear from them.
Very good. I think I have the sentiment. Anybody else? David? Any comment?
No, I agree with what you said. We are a duly elected commission, and if they certainly want to come here, they're welcome. I welcome
Okay.
all input.
I will send a email to the town manager tomorrow morning about that. Thank you. Is there any old business? Is there any new business?
Well, new or old, can I kick in?
Say again?
I say new or old, can I kick in?
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to make a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of October 25 or November 1. They are the usual exceptional minutes.
There are a couple of typos that we need to fix. So,
Yeah, minor typos, yep.
So do we want to do the minutes tonight? Are we ready? Because there are a couple of typos. We can do them. Does that say yes, you do? So the meeting of October 25th. Any comments or changes on that? All right. Michelle, I first is on page 5. It says use of town council. That first paragraph there should be ascribed to who said it. I think actually that was, I commented, it made that first paragraph. Afterwards, it says use of town council. At the bottom of the page, refers to David Cohan, which should obviously be William Cohan, Bill Cohan. But other than that, I don't have any other changes to October 25th, if somebody wants to move those minutes.
So moved.
Minutes of
Second.
October 25th been moved to be accepted and seconded. All in favor? As corrected, thank you.
And I will abstain.
Who's abstained? David?
I was
Bill, I'm
away.
gonna abstain too.
Okay, the people were, let's see, that meeting was, looks like David Peck, Larry Pizer, and Scott Vecchia have all abstained because they were not present. Got it. So all in favor of approving the minutes with those abstentions? All right. The meeting of November 15th,
No, November 1.
let's see, November 1st, actually, November 1st, and the
Got a
people
one,
that were
yeah.
not here for that meeting was just David Peck. So does any other comments for approval?
Motion?
Motion to accept the minutes of November 1 have been made and seconded. All in favor? So approved.
Aye.
Thank you. So our next meeting is November 29th, which is 2 weeks from tonight. It will be at 7 o'clock. Any other comments? Then a motion is in order to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you.